Welcome to a two-part video that's entitled Encrypted Backups. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss here. Now, when you first hear the term encrypted backups, it sounds really cool. And it is, but there are a couple of things you need to keep in mind. First of all, we're already familiar with the process of performing backups on really everything, but especially on our SQL Server databases. Backups protect the data from some sort of catastrophic failure on our SQL Server. If something happens to the SQL Server itself, our data somehow becomes so horribly corrupted that we can't get it rebuilt without massive data loss, and so it's just better to restore from a backup. While backups do protect us from data loss, they also potentially expose that data to theft. Because once I perform a backup, then I need to put a copy of that backup, at least one. A lot of people do two or more. I need to put it somewhere safe off site. So if we have some sort of catastrophic thing like a fire, flood, something like that in our building, I still have a copy of my data, at least a recent copy of the data, somewhere off site, supposedly in a safe place. The idea of encrypting the data backup offers an extra level of data protection because if I've got a backup stored somewhere and it's not encrypted, then all somebody has to do is just physically take that disk or however it's stored or grab a copy of that data and just simply restore it or attach it to another SQL server and they have access to our data. And so the idea is that if we encrypt it, even if they grab it physically, they're not going to have the keys to be able to decrypt it. SQL Server provides the ability to encrypt data backups, but we've already discussed this in a couple of different forms in the course, but let me just remind you one more time. Anytime you start using encryption, you need to make sure that you're backing up all the keys, all the certificates that are used in encrypting this data, or you may kind of shoot yourself in the foot, as they say, and encrypt your backup. And then when you need it, you don't have the keys necessary. And now you can't decrypt your data, and it's the same as losing it to start with. Now, there are a couple of requirements that you'll need to meet for creating an encrypted backup. First of all, you'll need a database master key for the master database. You will also need a certificate or asymmetric key available on the instance of SQL Server. Now, let me just say something here right quick about a certificate and an asymmetric key. You can create an asymmetric key on SQL Server. This is going to create your two kind of algorithmic opposite keys. You use one to encrypt and the other one can decrypt and vice versa. A certificate actually creates usually asymmetric keys, but it uses the certificate to basically provide very positive identification on that key set so that you can tell who you're communicating with. Once those two objects, our database master key and a certificate or an asymmetric key on the SQL Server has been created, then we can go about our business of performing the backup. Now let's talk about these two objects that are required. The database master key. This is a symmetric key. Now, earlier in the course, we talked about the difference between asymmetric and symmetric. And if you remember, symmetric is a single key. That single key is used to encrypt and decrypt data. And what we're going to use that for here is we're going to use the symmetric key to protect the private keys of certificates and any asymmetric keys that are present in the database. We're going to protect our private keys with our key pairs, with the certificates and asymmetric keys, and the database master key is what we're going to use to do that. Now, keep in mind, we could use our database master key to encrypt data, but it has a length limitation that makes it less practical for data. And so it's going to be better to create the private keys and the public keys, either using certificates or just straight up asymmetric keys to take care of that. Now, when it comes to creating a certificate is a database level securable. It follows the X.509 standard and it supports X.509 version 1 fields. Now, the purpose of a certificate is to tie personal identifiable information to the private and public key pair. A certificate can be created for a database by executing the create certificate tsql statement. When we do that, we can load a certificate from a file or an assembly, or we can generate what we call a self-signed certificate and generate a key pair, a private and a public key, with that certificate. Keep in mind, if we create our own self-signed certificate, nobody outside our organization will trust that certificate. It could have come from anywhere. But if we go to the trouble and the expense of contacting one of these certificate authorities out there on the internet, VeriSign was one, a big one for a while. There's quite a few of them. But you contact these folks and you provide all sorts of identifying documentation depending on what level of security that you're trying to create a certificate for. And they basically will sign your certificate with their certificate signature. And anybody else outside your organization that attempts to utilize this certificate will recognize, hey, wait a minute, this thing has been validated or trusted by these other folks out here. So I know I can trust that this is a legitimate, on the level type organization that I'm dealing with. So that's where certificates and certificate signing comes in. Now, I've put some documentation out there in the working files folder for you for this chapter. And I've just kind of thrown some things out there. Look through this information, look at the links at the bottom of this information, and just kind of start reading through this whole encrypting process in SQL Server. There's lots to learn. There's lots going on. But if you just kind of go step by step and work your way through it, you'll be just fine. I've put one out there in the working files folder for this chapter called Create Certificate. It's a PDF document. It'll take you through the process and the various syntactical options of the Create Certificate statement. Then there's Backup Certificate. When you create a certificate, you need to back up that certificate, because later, when you get ready to restore this database, you're going to have those keys and that certificate to make that happen. Next, I've put one out there called Backup a Database Master Key. Again, PDF file. Helps you with the concept of backing up your database master key and then backing up the service master key. There's lots more than those. I just kind of stopped there. But again, if you look at the links at the bottom, you'll see other information that you can get out there. We'll stop right here. And in part 2, we're going to open SQL Server Management Studio and perform an encrypted backup and let you actually see one in action.